Welcome. I just want to say thank you for agreeing to meet us. As you know, people here are anarchists and activists involved in a whole lot of different types of struggle around. There are people involved in the anti-war movement and the Rossport campaign, the protest activity, defeating service charge, collection taxes, and way possibly remember when I'm nervous. So, because you're here for a very short amount of time, we decided that the best thing we do is to focus on a couple of questions we'd be interested in asking. But if you've got questions you want to ask us, do that as well.
Hello, come on, discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I have to be so rushed. Thanks, Dave.
Sure, I can't talking this time.
No, it's okay. That's a possible place. This is where relaxing. You know, experience.
Okay, so John has got the first question. Where is he?
Here.
Okay.
I know. I'm just wondering, anarchism is a pretty small political tendency in the world today. I'm just wondering, what do you think, do you think underlying relevancy, or what role do you see it playing in the future in a sort of great world?
I actually don't think that anarchism is a small tendency. I mean, what's called anarchism is a small tendency, but it's a very natural understanding of most people. You know, I'm sure you find this in your own organizing work. When you talk about anarchist principles, they resonate with most people because it's basically their own conception of the world. I mean, the feeling that you ought to be dominated by someone is not a natural human feeling. So if there are, and everyone's faced with them all the time, structures of domination and control, most people don't like them. Okay, it's anarchism. If you don't like systems of domination and control, you should do things to dismantle them. It's basic anarchist principle. It's very deeply embedded in people. You really have to work really hard to drive it out of people's heads. There's enormous efforts to drive these normal sentiments out of people's heads, but they're never far below the surface, which is why they always well up all over the time whenever there's any kind of confrontation or break or opportunity to think about things, they just emerge. I think anarchists have the easiest organizing task of anybody. They're mostly common sense.
Okay, Dermot, who interrupted you yesterday.
Sorry about that.
He got very excited.
Yeah.
He's got a second chance to do
I've got a second
it.
I hope it's not your last word, just a busy schedule and all that. But it's great to see you. First thing I'd like to say is welcome to the North Side. It's great to have you over here. The second thing I wanted to say was one of the first things that you wrote about was the Spanish Revolution in 1936. This year being 2006 will be the 70th anniversary. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the relevance of that? Or does it have any relevance today? Given that it's quite a while ago.
Actually, did write about that at the advanced age of 10 years old. Fortunately, it's not preserved. But it was, I was pretty much interested in it from a child's point of view. I was hanging around, a couple of years later, I was hanging around anarchist offices in New York and picking up literature, talking to refugees. There were plenty of refugees who came over to the United States. They were running little secondhand bookstores and so on. Very happy to see some young person around. But it was a pretty amazing event. I mean, there was, and it has tremendous relevance. I think it's the peak of anti-authoritarian activism and success in history. There's been nothing like it, certainly in the modern world. And it was so important that it immediately elicited the joint attack by every force in the world. I mean, fascists, Stalinists, liberal democracies, and they all got together at once to crush it, because this was much too dangerous to tolerate. And it was only after they had succeeded in crushing the revolution that they sort of went to pick up the pieces and fight each other, more or less. There was was a popular libertarian revolution. There's a lot to learn from it. It was not spontaneous. It had been developed for 50 years of intensive organizing, experimentation, schools, revolts, which partially succeeded, crushed, it left a memory, people go on. And it was just in people's heads. So when the moment came, people just carried out what was in their heads. And it was done in different ways in industrial areas in Catalonia, the peasant areas, and Asturias, and so on, that developed very rapidly. Complex, was a lot of things to be criticized. Interesting, good proposals as to how to win the war, which have been mostly suppressed by now, but the sensible idea as to how to fight Franco was coming from anarchists, in particular from Camillo Ranieri, who was killed in the May days, an Italian anarchist who joined. And his it might not work, but he had the right idea, and it's an idea that's very pertinent to the world since, and not a place of knowing it, but these things are so obvious to people that they keep coming back without any history. But his idea, which is highly pertinent, was that they should not fight a military war against Franco. It's not going to work. They should fight if to the extent there's any fighting, it should be guerrilla war, which is very natural in Spain. That's where the concept of guerrilla war developed in the Napoleonic Wars. And again, it's in people's heads. And the main thing that they should do is undercut the roots of the Franco army. The Franco army was a Moorish army. It was coming from Morocco. And his sensible proposal was, you don't fight them, you cause them to collapse. And you cause them to collapse by dealing with their problems. I mean, the people in the Franco army are just as oppressed as you are. They're not some kind of beasts. They're Moroccans who were enlisted into the essentially Foreign Legion. It's the same Spanish Legion, incidentally, which today, speaking of relevance, it's the same Spanish Legion which in the last few days has its commander announced that they're going to march on Madrid to prevent devolution in Spain or rights to Catalonia. So that's today's headline. Same Legion, same commander, not the same people, same kind of commanders. And the suggestion then, which applies now too, is to undercut their base by supporting the revolutionary movements in North Africa. They were there. There were Abdelkrim was organizing a revolutionary movement to try to call for land, for freedom, ridding themselves of French and Spanish imperialism. And Ranieri's proposal was, well, okay, let's support them. If we support them instead of fighting them, they join us. They want land. They don't want French boots on their necks. So sure, let's all get together and fight the same war against the combined leadership on all sides. Now, of course, that would have utterly infuriated France and Britain and the United States. It would have gone totally berserk. But, if you had a choice at that point, shall we cater to the imperial powers and let them carve us up and smash us and so on? Or shall we just fight a people's war against them? Could have well worked. I mean, it could have held off the Second World War, because of the changes that might have taken place. But those are issues which are by no means dead. Like I say, park on the front pages right now, and they show up both in terms of struggles against imperialism, in different forms, but the same principles, and also just the tremendous success in collectivization and building a society without hierarchy.